Hey, Katie.
Hi, sweetie.
How are you?
I'm really
Oh,
tired.
oh, oh, you look quite sleepy. Oh, has it been a busy day? Have you got a nice cup of tea there? What's going on?
It was him.
Oh, the chief tea maker didn't make tea. Hello. Oh, I've got some mince pies in the oven now, with 12 minutes left to go, so I'm looking forward to having those in a few minutes.
How exciting.
Yeah. Looking forward to this new book.
Yeah, new books are always good.
Yeah. What did you get up to yesterday? Anything fun? Well, the whole weekend, actually.
I went for a walk.
Yeah. Is it still quite snowy near you?
Getting less so.
Ah, okay.
It's raining a lot.
Oh, okay. My sister's snowman that she built the other day looks like E.T. now. Its head's gone really weird.
How about yourself?
Yeah, oh, good, thanks. So played games with a few Manchester friends yesterday. That was good. We played Scribblio, or Scribble, which is basically like it's scribble.io on the website. So I'm not sure that it's called Scribble or Scribblio, but who knows. But yeah, it's good fun. Yeah, like Pictionary, basically.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, Malcolm.
Oh, dee.
You're getting beardy again.
Yes, although I will go to work at some point relatively soon, and I'll have to shave most of it off.
That's upsetting.
Yeah.
Did you survive Among Us?
What's that?
Did you survive Among Us?
Not every round, but yeah, it was nice. It was good.
Yeah.
Me, Iris, and Nis played about half a game of Hanabi to start with as well.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that, but I've never played. Any good?
It's a pleasant one. It's kind of really just a numbers game, but it's not too complex. Like, I think it's a nice one.
Oh, cool. Hey, Tara. Oh, hi, Tara.
Hello.
Hey, there you are.
Hello.
Sure.
You're so cute.
Yeah. I thought I would just connect up to introduce Nina when she shows up.
Oh, she's up soon.
Yeah, she said.
Cool.
Oh, that's cute. This is the most hair I've ever seen you with, Tara.
Oh, it's so long, isn't it? I just couldn't be bothered cutting it.
It's all right, yeah. So, well, same here, really.
It's not too bad this time. Usually it's a lot messier and bitsier when it gets this long. I don't find it too horrible, so
yeah. Oh.
I'll just wait until the weather gets warmer. Yeah, there's Araha. She's up late tonight because I made dinner really late. Yeah, so I'll be taking her to bed really soon.
Oh,
but she's happy to see you all.
Oh, hello. You've got long hair as well.
Oh, she does. That must be the longest hair you've ever seen her with as well.
Yeah.
It's well down in her eyes now, but she'll wear a headband, but only for going out.
Oh, that's cute.
Takes it off as soon as she gets in the house.
Oh. And hey, Joe, we've got Joe.
Frankie. Hello. I finally made it.
Yay! It's only taken 7 months.
So I'm gonna miss the beginning because I've got to do bedtime, but I just wanted to come and say hi because our friend Nina is joining for the first time. So I just wanted to introduce her, even though she's not gonna have her sound and video on.
Oh, exciting!
Yeah.
Nina, it is lovely to have you along.
Oh,
hello.
Hey, Nina.
Hi. I'm just about to get undressed and get into the bath, but I just thought I'd say hi first.
Lovely to see you.
Nina. It's Nina.
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah, it's Nina. Oh, you want to make her big? Yeah, we can make Nina big. How do we do that?
Pen and pen.
Oh, okay. All right, there we go. Big one. Yeah, Nina's just been visiting us
Hi.
over Christmas and New Year, but she's back in Spain now. So, Ara wants to touch it, Nina.
Who else have we got? Who else have we? Hi, everybody.
Got the best gift giver in the world online
The
as well.
best gift. Tal's here.
Oh.
She's gonna
That
go
was
now.
incredible.
In the bath.
Oh, that was very impressive.
I'm really glad you finally got it and that you liked it.
Absolutely love it. Like I was freaking out when I opened it. It's incredible. And I love that there's 2 book plates because then I can put one in chocolate and I can put one in my scrapbook.
Yeah, it was very kind of her to send them. I was very surprised.
Yeah. Wow, everyone's got the longest hair
Okay.
ever.
I'm
Yeah.
going to turn off the camera now.
Good to see you.
Who else have we got?
Bye.
Ariane's here.
Have a nice bath.
Hi,
Hey,
Ariane.
Ariane.
Hello.
Yeah.
How are you doing, honey?
Good to see you.
Very exciting faces. Right.
Look, it's him.
Back.
Exciting faces. We've got Jen. Hi, Jen. Hi, Bracken. Hi, Bracken. We've got Zach. Hi, Zach.
Hello.
What a hottie.
I've got Hello,
Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, Aroha.
Milk.
Hi.
Oh my god, that baby's so cute.
Okay.
Yay!
So let's say
That's not-
good night, everyone.
That's not a baby, that's a child.
She's nearly 21 months, so yeah. But she's called a baby. Yeah. Okay. Good night. Good night, Em. Good night, Nina. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
I'll be back later.
See you in a bit.
There's Alex briefly.
Have you re-dyed your hair?
I have over the holidays at some point, yes.
Ah, it looks spectacular.
Thank you.
How are you, Frankie, today?
Wow, it's a Nina.
I'm very well. I think I'm very well. What have I done today? I've mostly read poetry today. I had every intention of having an incredibly productive day and
Reading
diving
poetry is
straight
productive.
up into work. Well, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I have done some work, but I have mostly read poetry.
Honestly, I think it's barbaric that in England you have to go back to work today. Like, that's shit.
I'm in Scotland and I still had to go back to work today,
Oh, that's even worse.
Honey.
as did Katie.
Aw.
Fuck this working
Right.
shift.
Outrage.
Not right. Not right. But I got my website set up.
Tell
Um,
us all
and
about that.
I mean, it's just it's not anything.
A website for what? A
Just
website for what? I'm just.
just for me as a person, as I am like now going out into the world and should probably have some sort of internet presence that isn't Facebook and Storytime. So I've set myself up a little website.
What's the website name?
That sounds very productive to me. frankieporter.com.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. The reason I ask is
Don't look at it until I've replaced the picture.
I'm sorry, I have to.
Oh, I haven't looked yet.
we'll spike the traffic. You'll be trending tomorrow.
Everyone look right now.
Oh, I like this picture.
It's so that's the picture. It's the picture that I had for my library card, from like my reader's card at the Bodleian, which is the only picture that I had on my computer that wasn't of me going like.
That's your usual pose.
I know. Well,
Frankie, you're doing blue steel.
Yeah, it's quite blue steel.
Oh, well, now we're all looking. Ooh, that is a good look.
Do a DOS on it, I think.
got a photo of you carrying a Christmas tree, if that would help.
I don't like that photo is very charming, but I don't know whether it would really strike the right professional tone that I'm looking for.
No,
This looks great,
perfect.
Frankie.
Your heading
Really
is
good.
reader, writer, storyteller, and passionate devotee of the Oxford comma. Like, first off, as someone in marketing, love it, great hook. But like the look with that makes you look like serious yet playful. It's good.
Yeah.
It works.
I love it. I love it. It's fab.
Thanks, folks. This is such a good boost for my.
Oh, look on your contact page.
Short stories.
Strong opinions about the correct way to organise bookshelves. Yes.
Yay! Yay! Push traffic! Push traffic! I don't know what those words mean, but I'm given to understand. What time is it, everybody?
2 minutes to Norman's pies come out the oven.
1 minute.
1 minute to story.
1 minute. 1 minute to story.
Let's not rush ahead of ourselves now.
Yeah. Whoa, 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 everybody. Whoa,
What is
whoa.
this, Tuesday?
Hey, Carmen.
We got Carmen. Hi, Carmen.
I'm back.
Hey, Bina.
Hi.
We've got a full screen.
Yeah, we've got Ashera. Hi, everybody. We've got Abby. Holy shit. Oh my god, this book better be good.
Will be. It's great. You say this every time.
Sorry, Zach.
We only give you shit about saying it because you've seen how much we love your choices.
Yeah.
So just making it worse.
You can say it as much as you want if you're feeling it.
Hi, Maureen.
Hey, g'day. Also, good evening, Kirsty Logan.
Good evening, Kirsty Logan. And maybe Joanne Harris. I mean, not Joanne Harris, but like, the spirit stands.
Ariane, are you doing crochet there?
Yes, I am.
That's huge, that blanket. That's amazing.
Can we see?
No, we can't because it's a gift for someone.
Okay.
We'll be catching up.
That's so exciting.
I mean, for someone, it's a gift for someone who's related to someone who might be catching up. I think the person it's destined for might be a little bit too young to watch yet.
Oh,
That's so cool.
I think Katie may be trying to tell us something.
There we go.
Has Katie got something to tell us?
Story time.
Is it story time? Okay.
Love and Sean's spoon action there, by the way.
Ooh.
I have dark chocolate ice cream with my mum gave me for Christmas like these boozy berries. They're like cherries and strawberries and things like soaked in like champagne and spirits.
Oh my god.
That's all I have to say on the matter.
I feel a bit weak after that description. Also, Sean, your hair looks amazing. It's so ruffleable.
The curl is officially coming back.
Yay! Curl club. Okay, right, everybody. How the hell do I mute you all? There we go. Also, while I have you all muted, whoever took over my account over the Christmas period and set my profile picture to a meerkat, you're very funny. You're very funny. Right. Now. Are you sitting comfortably? And I'll begin. This is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. Chapter 1. The Blue Door. When I was 7, I found a door. I suspect I should capitalize that word, so you understand I'm not talking about your common garden or common variety door that leads reliably to a white-tiled kitchen or a bedroom closet. When I was 7, I found a door. There. Look how tall and proud the word stands on the page now. The belly of that D like a black archway leading into white nothing. When you see that word, I imagine a little prickle of familiarity makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You don't know a thing about me. You can't see me sitting at this yellow wood desk, the salt-sweet breeze riffling these pages like a reader looking for her bookmark. You can't see the scars that twist and knot across my skin. You don't even know my name. It's January Scaller. So now I suppose you do know a little something about me and I've ruined my point. But you know what it means when you see the word door. Maybe you've even seen one for yourself, standing half ajar and rotted in an old church, or oiled and shining in a brick wall. Maybe, if you're one of those fanciful persons who find their feet running towards unexpected places, you've even walked through one and found yourself in a very unexpected place indeed. Or maybe you've never so much as glimpsed a door in your life. There aren't as many of them as there used to be. But you still know about doors, don't you? Because there are 10,000 stories about 10,000 doors, and we know them as well as we know our names. They lead to fairy, to Valhalla, Atlantis and Lemuria, heaven and hell, to all the directions a compass could never take you, to elsewhere. My father, who is a true scholar and not just a young lady with an ink pen and a series of things she has to say, puts it much better. If we address stories as archaeological sites and dust through their layers with meticulous care, we find at some level there is always a doorway, a dividing point between here and there, us and them, mundane and magical. It is at the moments when the doors open, when things flow between the worlds, that stories happen. He never capitalized doors, but perhaps scholars don't capitalize words just because of the shapes they make on the page. It was the summer of 1901, although the arrangement of 4 numbers on a page didn't mean much to me then. I think of it now as a swaggering, full of itself sort of year, shining with the gold-plated promises of a new century. It had shared all the mess and fuss of the 19th century, all those wars and revolutions and uncertainties, all those imperial growing pains. And now there was nothing but peace and prosperity wherever one looked. Mr. J.P. Morgan had recently become the richest man in the entire history of the world. Queen Victoria had finally expired and left her vast empire to her kingly-looking son. Those unruly boxers had been subdued in China, and Cuba had been tucked neatly beneath America's civilized wing. Reason and rationality reigned supreme, and there was no room for magic or mystery. There was no room, it turned out, for little girls who wandered off the edge of the map and told the truth about the mad, impossible things they found there. I found it on the raggedy western edge of Kentucky, right where the state dips its toe into the Mississippi. It's not the kind of place you'd expect to find anything mysterious or even mildly interesting. It's flat and scrubby-looking, populated by flat, scrubby-looking people. The sun hangs twice as hot and 3 times as bright as it does in the rest of the country, even at the very end of August. And everything feels damp and sticky, like the soap scum left on your skin when you're the last one to use the bath. But doors, like murder suspects in cheap mysteries, are often where you least expect them. I was only in Kentucky at all because Mr. Locke had taken me along on one of his business trips. He said it was a real treat and a chance to see how things are done, but really it was because my nursemaid was teetering on the edge of hysteria and had threatened to quit at least 4 times in the last month. I was a difficult child back then. Or maybe it was because Mr. Locke was trying to cheer me up. A postcard had arrived last week from my father. It had a picture of a brown girl wearing a pointy gold hat and a resentful expression, with the words "authentic Burmese costumes" stamped alongside her. On the back were 3 lines in tidy brown ink, extending my stay back in October. Thinking of you, J.S. Mr. Locke had read it over my shoulder and patted my arm in a clumsy, keep your chin up sort of way. A week later, I was stuffed in the velvet and wood-panelled coffin of a Pullman sleeper car, reading The Rover Boys in the Jungle, while Mr. Locke read the business section of the Times, and Mr. Sterling stared into space with a valet's professional blankness. I ought to introduce Mr. Locke properly. He'd hate to wander into the story in such a casual, slantwise way. Allow me to present Mr. William Cornelius Locke, self-made, not quite billionaire, head of W.C. Locke & Co., owner of no less than 3 stately homes along the eastern seaboard, proponent of the virtues of order and propriety, words that he certainly would prefer to see capitalized. See that P, like a woman with her hand on her hip? And chairman of the New England Archaeological Society, a sort of social club for rich, powerful men who were also amateur collectors. I say amateur only because it was fashionable for wealthy men to refer to their passions in this dismissive way, with a little flick of their fingers, as if admitting to a profession other than money-making might sully their reputations. In truth, I sometimes suspected that all Locke's money-making was specifically designed to fuel his collecting hobby. His home in Vermont, the one we actually lived in, as opposed to the 2 other pristine structures intended mainly to impress his significance upon the world, was a vast private Smithsonian, packed so tightly it seemed to be constructed of artifacts rather than mortar and stones. There was little organisation. Limestone figures of wide-hipped women kept company with Indonesian screens carved like lace, and obsidian arrowheads shared a glass case with the taxidermied arm of an Edo warrior. I hated that arm, but couldn't stop looking at it, wondering what it had looked like, alive and muscled, how its owner would have felt about a little girl in America looking at his paper-dry flesh without even knowing his name. My father was one of Mr. Locke's field agents, hired when I was nothing but an eggplant-sized bundle wrapped in an old travelling coat. Your mother had just died, you know, very sad case, Mr. Locke liked to recite to me, and there was your father, this odd-coloured, scarecrow-looking fellow with, God help him, tattoos up and down his arms, in the absolute middle of nowhere with a baby. I said to myself, Cornelius, there's a man in need of a little charity. Father was hired before dusk. Now he gallivants around the world collecting objects of particular unique value and mailing them to Mr. Locke so that he can put them in glass cases with brass plaques and shout at me when I touch them or play with them, or steal the Aztec coins to recreate scenes from Treasure Island. And I stay in my little grey room in Locke House and harass the nursemaids Locke hires to civilise me and wait for father to come home. At 7, I'd spent considerably more time with Mr. Locke than with my own biological father, and insofar as it was possible to love someone so naturally comfortable in 3-piece suits, I loved him. As was his custom, Mr. Locke had taken rooms for us in the nicest establishment available. In Kentucky, that translated to a sprawling Pinewood hotel on the edge of the Mississippi, clearly built by someone who wanted to open a grand hotel but hadn't ever met one in real life. There were candy-striped wallpaper and electric chandeliers, but a sour catfish smell seeped up from the floorboards. Mr. Locke waved past the manager with a fly-swatting gesture, told him to keep an eye on the girl, there's a good fellow, and swept into the lobby with Mr. Sterling trailing like a man-shaped dog at his heels. Locke greeted a bow-tied man waiting on one of the flowery couches. "Governor Dockery, a pleasure. I read your last missive with greatest attention, I assure you. And how is your cranium collection coming?" So that was why we came. Mr. Locke was meeting one of his Archaeological Society pals for an evening of drinking, cigar smoking, and boasting. They had an annual society meeting every summer at Locke House, a fancy party followed by a stuffy, members-only affair that neither I nor my father was permitted to attend. But some of the real enthusiasts couldn't wait the full year and sought one another out whenever they could. The manager smiled at me in that forced, panicky way of childless adults, and I smiled toothily back. "I'm going out," I told him confidently. He smiled a little harder, blinking with uncertainty. People are always uncertain about me. My skin is sort of coppery red, as if it's covered all over with cedar sawdust, but my eyes are round and light, and my clothes are expensive. Was I a pampered pet or a serving girl? Should the poor manager serve me tea or toss me in the kitchens with the maids? I was what Mr. Locke called an in-between sort of thing. I tipped over a tall vase of flowers, gasped an insincere, "Oh dear," and slunk away while the manager swore and mopped at the mess with his coat. I escaped outdoors. See how that word slips into even the most mundane of stories? Sometimes I feel there are doors lurking in the creases of every sentence, with periods for knobs and verbs for hinges. The streets were nothing but sun-baked stripes crisscrossing themselves before they ended in the muddy river. But the people of Ninley, Kentucky, seemed inclined to stroll along them as if they were proper city streets. They stared and muttered as I went by. An idle dock worker pointed and nudged his companion. "That's a little Chickasaw girl, I'll bet you." His workmate shook his head, citing his extensive personal experience with Indian girls, and speculated, "West Indian, maybe, or a half-breed." I kept walking. People were always guessing like that, categorizing me as one thing or another, but Mr. Locke assured me they were all equally incorrect. "A perfectly unique specimen," he called me. Once, after a comment from one of the maids, I'd asked him if I was coloured, and he'd snorted. "Odd-coloured, perhaps, but hardly coloured." I didn't really know what made a person coloured or not, but the way he said it made me glad I wasn't. The speculating was worse when my father was with me. His skin is darker than mine, a lustrous red-black, and his eyes are so black even the whites are threaded with brown. Once you factor in the tattoos, ink spirals twisting up both wrists, and the shabby suit, and the spectacles, and the muddled-up accent, and, well, people stared. I still wished he were with me. I was so busy walking and not looking back at all those white faces that I thudded into someone. "Sorry, Mum, An old woman, hunched and seamed like a pale walnut, glared down at me. It was a practiced, grandmotherly glare, especially made for children who moved too fast and knocked into her. "Sorry," I said again. She didn't answer, but something shifted in her eyes like a chasm cleaving open. Her mouth hung open and her filming eyes went wide as shutters. Just who the hell are you? She hissed at me. People don't like in-between things, I suppose. I should have scurried back to the catfish-smelling hotel and huddled in Mr. Locke's safe, moneyed shadow, where none of those damn people could reach me. It would have been the proper thing to do. But as Mr. Locke so often complained, I could sometimes be quite improper, willful and temerarious, a word I assumed was unflattering from the company it kept. So I ran away. I ran until my stick-thin legs shook and my chest heaved against the fine seams of my dress. I ran until a street turned to a winding lane and the buildings behind me were swallowed up by wisteria and honeysuckle. I ran and tried not to think about the old woman's eyes on my face or how much trouble I would be in for disappearing. My feet stopped their churning only once they realised the dirt beneath them had turned to laid-over grasses. I found myself in a lonely, overgrown field, beneath a sky so blue it reminded me of the tiles my father brought back from Persia. A majestic, world-swallowing blue you could fall into. Tall, rust-coloured grasses rolled beneath it, and a few scattered cedars spiralled up towards it. Something in the shape of the scene, the rich smell of dry cedar in the sun, the grass swaying against the sky like a tigress in orange and blue, made me want to curl into the dry stems like a fawn waiting for her mother. I waded deeper, wandering, letting my hands trail through the frilled tops of wild grains. I almost didn't notice the door at all. All doors are like that, half-shadowed and sideways until someone looks at them in just the right way. This one was nothing but an old timber frame arranged in a shape like the start of a house of cards. Rust stains spotted the wood where hinges and nails had bled into nothing, and only a few brave planks remained of the door itself. Flaking paint still clung to it, the same royal blue as the sky. Now, I didn't know about doors at the time, and wouldn't have believed you even if you'd handed me an annotated 3-volume collection of eyewitness reports. But when I saw that raggedy blue door standing so lonesome in the field, I wanted it to lead someplace else. Someplace other than Ninley, Kentucky, someplace new and unseen and so vast I would never come to the end of it. I pushed my palm against the blue paint. The hinges groaned, just like the doors to haunted houses in all my penny papers and adventure stories. My heart patted in my chest, and some naive corner of my soul was holding its breath in expectation, waiting for something magical to happen. There was nothing on the other side of the door, of course. Just the cobalt and cinnamon colours of my own world, sky and field. And, God knows why, the sight of it broke my heart. I sat down in my nice linen dress and wept with the loss of it. What had I expected? One of those magical passages children are always stumbling across in my books? If Samuel had been there, we could have at least played pretend. Samuel Zapier was my only non-fictional friend, a dark-eyed boy with a clinical addiction to pulpy story papers and a faraway expression of a sailor watching the horizon. He visited Lock House twice a week in a red wagon with Zapier Family Groceries ink painted on the side in curlicued gold lettering, and usually contrived to sneak me the latest issue of the Argosy All-Story Weekly or the Halfpenny Marvel, along with the Flower and Onions. On weekends, he escaped his family's shop to join me in elaborate games of make-believe involving ghosts and dragons on the lakeshore. Sognatore, his mother called him, which Samuel said was Italian for good-for-nothing boy who breaks his mother's heart by dreaming all the time. But Samuel wasn't with me that day in the field. So I pulled out my little pocket diary and wrote a story instead. When I was 7, that diary was the most precious thing I had ever owned, although whether I technically owned it is legally questionable. I hadn't bought it, and no one had given it to me. I'd found it. I was playing in the Pharaoh room just before I turned 7, opening and closing all the urns and trying on the jewellery, and I happened to open a pretty blue treasure chest. Box with vaulted lid, decorated with ivory, ebony, blue faïence, Egypt. Originally matched pair. And in the bottom of the chest was this diary. Leather the colour of burnt butter, creamy cotton pages as blank and inviting as fresh snow. It seemed likely that Mr. Locke had left it for me to find, a secret gift he was too gruff to give directly, so I took it without hesitation. I wrote in it whenever I was lonely or lost feeling, or when my father was away and Mr. Locke was busy and the nursemaid was being horrible. I wrote a lot. Mostly I wrote stories like the one I read in Samuel copies of the Argosy, about brave little boys with blonde hair and names like Jack or Dick or Buddy. I spent a lot of time thinking of blood-curdling titles and copying them out with extra swirly lines. The Mystery of the Skeleton Key, The Golden Dagger Society, The Flying Orphan Girl, and no time at all worrying about plot. That afternoon, sitting in that lonely field beside the door that didn't lead anywhere, I wanted to write a different kind of story. A true kind of story. Something I could crawl into if only I believed it hard enough. Once there was a brave and temerarious girl who found a door. It was a magic door, that's why it has a capital D. She opened the door. For a single second, a stretched out slice of time that began on the sinuous curve of the S and ended when my pencil made its final swirl around the period, I believed it. Not in the half-pretending way that children believe in Santa Claus or fairies, but in the marrow-deep way you believe in gravity or rain. Something in the world shifted. I know that's a shit description, pardon my unladylike language, but I don't know how else to say it. It was like an earthquake that didn't disturb a single blade of grass, an eclipse that didn't cast a single shadow, a vast but invisible change. A sudden breeze plucked the edge of the diary. It smelled of salt and warm stone and a dozen faraway scents that did not belong in a scrubby field beside the Mississippi. I tucked my diary back in my skirts and stood. My legs shivered beneath me like birch trees in the wind, shaking with exhaustion, but I ignored them because the door seemed to be murmuring in a soft, clattering language made of wood rot and peeling paint. I reached towards it again, hesitated, and then I opened the door and stepped through. I wasn't anywhere at all. An echoing in-betweenness pressed against my eardrums, as if I'd swum to the bottom of a vast lake. My reaching hand disappeared into the emptiness. My boot swung in an arc that never ended. I call that in-between place the threshold now. Threshold, the line of the T splitting two empty places. Thresholds are dangerous places, neither here nor there, and walking across one is like stepping off the edge of a cliff in the naive faith that you'll sprout wings halfway down. You can't hesitate or doubt. You can't fear the in-between. My foot landed on the other side of the door. The cedar and sunlight smell was replaced by a coppery taste in my mouth. I opened my eyes. It was a world made of salt water and stone. I stood on a high bluff surrounded on all sides by an endless silver sea. Far below me, cupped by the curving shore of the island like a pebble in a palm, was a city. At least I supposed it was a city. It didn't have any of the usual trappings of one. No streetcars hummed and buzzed through it, and no haze of coal smoke curtained above it. Instead, there were whitewashed stone buildings arranged in artful spirals, dotted with open windows like black eyes. A few towers raised their heads above the crowd, and the masts of small ships made a tiny forest along the coast. I was crying again. Without theatre or flair, just crying, as if there was something I badly wanted and couldn't have. As my father did sometimes, when he thought he was alone. January! January! My name sounded like it was coming from a cheap gramophone several miles away, but I recognised Mr. Locke's voice echoing after me through the doorway. I didn't know how he'd found me, but I knew I was in trouble. Oh, I can't tell you how much I didn't want to go back. How the sea smelled so full of promise, how the coiling streets in the city below seemed to make a kind of script. If it hadn't been Mr. Locke calling me, the man who let me ride in fancy train cars and bought me nice linen dresses, the man who patted my arm when my father disappointed me and left pocket diaries for me to find, I might have stayed. But I turned back to the door. It looked different on this side, a tumble-down arch of weathered basalt, without even the dignity of wooden planks to serve as a door. A grey curtain fluttered in the opening instead. I drew it aside. Just before I stepped back through the arch, a glint of silver shimmered at my feet. A round coin lay half buried in the soil, stamped with several words in a foreign language and the profile of a crown woman. It felt warm in my palm. I slipped it into my dress pocket. This time the threshold passed over me like the brief shadow of a bird's wing. The dry smell of grass and sun returned. Oh, there you are. Mr. Locke stood in his shirt sleeves and vest, huffing a little, his moustache bristling like the tail of a recently offended cat. Where were you? Been out here shouting myself hoarse. Had to interrupt my meeting with Alexander. What's this? He was staring at the blue-flecked door, his face gone slack. Nothing, sir. His eyes snapped away from the door and onto me, ice sharp. January, tell me what you've been doing. I should have lied. It would have saved so much heartache. But you have to understand, when Mr. Locke looks at you in this particular way of his, with his moon-pale eyes, you mostly end up doing what he wants you to. I suspect it's the reason W.C. Locke & Co. is so profitable. I swallowed. I was just playing, and I went through this door, see, and it leads to someplace else. There was a white city by the sea. If I'd been older, I might have said, it smelled of salt and age and adventure. It smelled like another world, and I want to return right this minute and walk those strange streets. Instead, I added articulately, I liked it. Tell the truth. His eyes pressed me flat. I am, I swear. He stared for another long moment. I watched the muscles of his jaw roll and unroll. And where did this door come from? Did you build it? Stick it together out of this rubbish? He gestured, and I noticed the overgrown pile of rotted lumber behind the door, the scattered bones of a house. No, sir, I just found it and wrote a story about it. A story? I could see him stumbling over each unlikely twist in our conversation and hating it. He liked to be in control of any given exchange. I fumbled for my pocket diary and pressed it into his hands. Look right there, see? I wrote a little story, and then the door was sort of open. It's true, I swear it's true. His eyes flicked over the page many more times than was necessary to read a 3-sentence story. Then he removed a cigar stub from his coat pocket and struck a match, puffing until the end glowed at me like the hot orange eye of a dragon. He sighed, the way he sighed when he was forced to deliver some bad news to his investors, and closed my diary. What fanciful nonsense, January. How often have I tried to cure you of it? He ran his thumb across the cover of my diary, and then deliberately, almost mournfully, tossed it into the messy heap of lumber behind him. No, you can't. I'm sorry, January. Truly. He met my eyes and made an abortive movement with his hand, as if he wanted to reach toward me. But this is simply what must be done for your sake. I'll expect you at dinner. I wanted to fight him, to argue, to snatch my diary out of the dirt. But I couldn't. I ran away instead. Back across the field, back up winding dirt roads, back into the sour-smelling hotel lobby. And so, the very beginning of my story features a skinny-legged girl on the run twice in the space of a few hours. Not a very heroic introduction, is it? But if you're an in-between sort of creature with no family and no money, with nothing but your own 2 legs and a silver coin, sometimes running away is the only thing you can do. And anyway, if I hadn't been the kind of girl who ran away, I wouldn't have found the blue door. And there wouldn't be much of a story to tell. The fear of God and Mr. Locke kept me quiet that evening and the following day. I was well watched by Mr. Sterling and the nervous hotel manager, who herded me the way you might handle a valuable but dangerous zoo animal. I amused myself for a while by slamming the keys on the grand piano and watching him flinch, but eventually I was shepherded back into my room and advised to go to sleep. I was out the low window and dodging through the alley before the sun had fully set. The road was scattered with shadows like shallow black pools, and by the time I reached the field, stars were shimmering through the hot haze of smoke and tobacco that hung over Ninley. I stumbled through the grass, squinting into the gloom for that house of cards shape. The blue door wasn't there. Instead, I found a ragged black circle in the grass. Ash and char were all that remained of my door. My pocket diary lay among the coals, curled and blackened. I left it there. When I stumbled back into the sagging, not very grand hotel, the sky was tar black and my knee socks were stained. Mr. Locke was sitting in an oily blue cloud of smoke in the lobby with his ledgers and papers spread before him and his favourite jade tumbler full of evening scotch. "And where have you been this evening? Did you walk back through that door and find yourself on Mars? Or the moon, perhaps?" But his tone was gentle. The thing about Mr. Locke is that he really was kind to me. Even during the worst of it, he was always kind. "No," I admitted, "but I bet there are more doors just like it. I bet I could find them and write about them and they'd all open. And I don't care if you don't believe me." Why didn't I just keep my stupid mouth closed? Why didn't I shake my head and apologise with a hint of tears in my voice and slink off to bed with the memory of the blue door like a secret talisman in my pocket? Because I was 7 and stubborn and didn't yet understand the cost of true stories. "Is that so?" was all that Mr. Locke said, and I marched to my room under the impression that I'd evaded more serious punishment. It wasn't until we'd arrived back in Vermont a week later that I realised I was wrong. Locke House was an immense red stone castle perched at the edge of Lake Champlain, topped with a forest of chimneys and copper-roofed towers. Its innards were wood-panelled and labyrinthine, bristling with the strange and rare and valuable. A Boston Herald columnist had once described it as architecturally fanciful, more reminiscent of Ivanhoe than a modern man's abode. It was rumoured that a mad Scotsman had commissioned it in the 1790s, spent a week living in it and then vanished forevermore. Mr. Locke bought it at auction in the 1880s and began filling it with the world's wonders. Father and I were stuffed into 2 rooms on the 3rd story, a tidy square office for him with a big desk and a single window, and a grey, musty-smelling room with 2 narrow beds for me and my nursemaid. The newest one was a German immigrant named Miss Wilder, who wore heavy black woolen gowns and an expression that said she hadn't seen much of the 20th century yet, but heartily disapproved of it thus far. She liked hymns and freshly folded laundry and detested fuss, mess, and cheek. We were natural enemies. Upon our return, Wilder and Mr. Locke had a hurried conversation in the hall. Her eyes glittered at me like overshined coat buttons. "Mr. Locke tells me you've been overstimulated lately, nearly hysterical, little dove." Miss Wilder often called me Little Dove. She was a believer in the power of suggestion. "No, ma'am." "Ah, poor dear. We'll have you right as the rain in no time at all." The cure for overstimulation was a calm, structured environment without distraction. My room was therefore summarily stripped of everything colourful or whimsical or dear. The curtains were drawn and the bookshelf cleared of anything more exciting than a child's illustrated Bible. My favourite pink and gold bedspread, Father had sent it to me from Bangalore the previous year, was exchanged for starched white sheets. Samuel was forbidden to visit. Miss Wilder's key slid and thunked in the keyhole, and I was alone. At first I imagined myself a prisoner of war resisting the redcoats or rebels and practiced my expression of stoic resistance. But by the second day the silence was like 2 thumbs pressing against my eardrums, and my legs shuddered and shook with the desire to run and keep running, back to that cedar spiraled field, through the ashes of the blue door to some other world. On the 3rd day, my room became a cell, which became a cage, which became a coffin. And I discovered the very deepest fear that swam through my heart like eels in undersea caves. to be locked away, trapped and alone. Something in the centre of me cracked. I tore at the curtains with clawed nails. I ripped the knobs from dresser drawers. I beat my small fists against the locked door, and then I sat on the floor and wept great hiccuping rivers of tears until Miss Wilder returned with a syrupy spoonful of something that took me away from myself for a while. My muscles turned to oiled, languorous rivers, and my head bobbed loosely along the surface. The creep of shadows across the rugs became a terrible drama, so absorbing there wasn't room for anything else in my head until I fell asleep. When I woke, Mr. Locke was sitting at the side of my bed reading a newspaper. "Morning, my dear. And how are you feeling?" I swallowed sour spit. "Better, sir." "I'm glad." He folded his paper with architectural precision. "Listen to me very carefully, January. You are a girl of very great potential, immense even, but you've got to learn to behave yourself. From now on, there will be no more fanciful nonsense, or running off, or doors that lead places they shouldn't." His expression as he surveyed me made me think of old-timey illustrations of God, severely paternal, bestowing the kind of love that weighs and measures before it finds you worthy. His eyes were stones, pressing down. "You are going to mind your place and be a good girl." I wanted desperately to be worthy of Mr. Locke's love. "Yes, sir," I whispered. And I was. My father didn't return until November, looking as creased and tired as his luggage. His arrival followed its usual pattern. The wagon crunched its way up the drive and stopped before the stone majesty of Locke House. Mr. Locke went out to offer congratulatory backslapping, and I waited in the front hall with Miss Wilder, dressed in a jumper so starched I felt like a turtle in an overlarge shell. The door opened and he stood silhouetted, looking very dark and foreign in the pale November light. He paused on the threshold, because this was generally the moment 50 pounds of excited young girl rocketed into his kneecaps. But I didn't move. For the first time in my life, I didn't run to him. The silhouette's shoulders sagged. It seems cruel to you, doesn't it? A sullen child punishing her father for his absence. But I assure you my intentions at the time were thoroughly muddled. There was just something about the shape of him in the doorway that made me dizzy with anger. Maybe because he smelled like jungles and steamships and adventures, like shadowed caves and unseen wonders, and my world was so ferociously mundane. Or maybe just because I'd been locked away and he hadn't been there to open the door. He took 3 hesitant steps and crouched before me in the foyer. He looked older than I remembered, the stubble on his chin shining dull silver instead of black, as if every day he spent away from me were 3 days in his world. The sadness was the same as it always was, though, like a veil drawn over his eyes. He rested a hand on my shoulder, black snakes of tattoos twisting around his wrists. "January, is something wrong?" The familiar sound of my name in his mouth, his strange but not strange accent, almost undid me. I wanted to tell him the truth. I stumbled over something grand and wild, something that rips a hole in the shape of the world. I wrote something and it was true. But I'd learned better. I was a good girl now. "Everything is fine, sir," I answered, and watched the cool grown-upness of my voice hit my father like a slap. I didn't speak to him over the dinner table that evening, and I didn't sneak into his room that night to beg stories from him. And he was a champion storyteller, let me tell you. He always said 99% of his job was following the stories and seeing where they led. But I was done with that fanciful nonsense. No more doors or doors. No more dreams of silver seas and whitewashed cities. No more stories. I imagined this was just one of those lessons implicit in the process of growing up, which everyone learns eventually. I'll tell you a secret, though. I still had that silver coin with the portrait of the strange queen on it. I kept it in a tiny pocket sewed in my underskirt, flesh warm against my waist, and when I held it, I could smell the sea. It was my most precious possession for 10 years, until I turned 17 and found the 10,000 doors. How are we doing for time?
Read more anyways.
Bit more?
More.
Chapter 2. The leather-bound door. I wouldn't have found it if it weren't for the bird. I was heading down to the kitchen to steal evening coffee from Mrs. Pertram, the cook, when I heard a twittering, thrashing sound and paused halfway down the second staircase. I waited until it happened again, the rushing silence of beating wings and a hollow thudding. Silence. I followed the sound to the second-floor parlour, labelled the Pharaoh Room, where Mr. Locke's extensive Egyptian collection was housed. Red and blue caskets, marble urns with wings for handles, tiny golden ankhs on leather strings, carved stone columns orphaned from their temples. The whole room had a yellowy gold glow to it, even in the almost dark of a summer evening. The sound came from the southern corner of the room, where my blue treasure chest still stood. It rattled on its plinth. After I'd found my pocket diary, I hadn't been able to help circling back around to the chest every now and then and peering into its dusty-smelling depths. Around Christmas, a cut paper puppet appeared with little wooden sticks affixed to each of her limbs. The following summer, there was a tiny music box that played a Russian-sounding waltz, and then a little brown doll beaded in bright colours, and then an illustrated French edition of the Jungle Book. I never asked him directly, but I was certain they were gifts from Mr. Locke. They tended to show up right when I needed them most, when my father had forgotten another birthday or missed another holiday. I could almost feel his awkward hand on my shoulder, offering silent comfort. It seemed extremely unlikely, however, that he would intentionally hide a bird in the box. I lifted the lid, not quite believing it, and a grey and gold something exploded up at me as if fired from a small cannon and ricocheted around the parlour. It was a delicate, ruffled-looking bird with a marmalade-coloured head and spindly legs. I tried to look it up later, but it didn't look like any of the birds in Mr. Audubon's book. I was turning away, letting the lid of the chest fall, when I realised there was something else still inside it. A book. A smallish, leather-bound book with scuffed corners and with dented imprints where the gold-stamped title had been partially scraped off. The 10,000 Oars. I riffled the pages with one thumb. Those of you who are more than casually familiar with books Those of you who spend your free afternoons in fusty bookshops, who offer furtive, kindly strokes along the spines of familiar titles, understand that page riffling is an essential element in the process of introducing oneself to a new book. It isn't about reading the words, it's about reading the smell, which wafts from the pages in a cloud of dust and wood pulp. It might smell expensive and well bound, or it might smell of tissue-thin paper and blurred two-colour prints, or of 50 years unread in the home of a tobacco-smoking old man. Books can smell of cheap thrills or painstaking scholarship, of literary weight or unsolved mysteries. This one smelled unlike any book I'd ever held. Cinnamon and coal smoke, catacombs and loam, damp seaside evenings and sweat-slick noontimes beneath palm fronds. It smelled as if it had been in the mail for longer than any one parcel could be, circling the world for years and accumulating layers of smells, like a tramp wearing too many clothes. It smelled like adventure itself had been harvested in the wild, distilled to a fine wine and splashed across each page. But I'm stumbling ahead of myself. Stories are supposed to be told in order, with beginnings and middles and ends. I'm no scholar, but I know that much. I spent the years after the Blue Door doing what most willful, temerarious girls must do, becoming less so. In the fall of 1903, I was 9 and the world was tasting the word modern on its tongue. A pair of brothers in the Carolinas were experimenting enthusiastically with their flying machines. Our new president had just advised us to speak softly but carry big sticks, which apparently meant we ought to invade Panama. And bright red hair was briefly popular until women started reporting dizziness and hair loss, and Miss Valentine's hair potion was revealed to be little more than red rat poison. My father was somewhere in Northern Europe. My postcard showed snowy mountains and a pair of children dressed like Hansel and Gretel. The back said, "Happy belated birthday." And Mr. Locke finally trusted me enough to take me on another trip. My behaviour since the Kentucky incident had been impeccable. I didn't torment Mr. Sterling or disturb Mr. Locke's collections. I obeyed all Wilder's rules, even the really stupid ones about folding your collars straight after ironing. I didn't play on the grounds with lice-ridden urchins just off the boat, but merely watched Samuel driving the grocery cart from the third-story window of my father's study. He still snuck story papers to me whenever he could finagle them past Mrs. Pertram, their corners dog-eared to his favourite pages, and I returned them rolled tight in the empty milk bottles, with all the best and most bloodthirsty lines circled. He always looked up as he left, always stared long enough for me to know he'd seen me, and raised a hand. Sometimes, if Wilder wasn't looking and I was feeling daring, I touched my fingertips to the window pane in return. Mostly I spent my time conjugating Latin verbs and doing sums beneath the watery eye of my tutor. I sat through my weekly lessons with Mr. Locke, nodding politely while he lectured about stocks, regulatory boards that didn't know what was what, his youthful studies in England, and the 3 best varieties of Scotch. I practiced deportment with the senior housekeeper and learned how to smile politely at every guest and client who came to call. "Aren't you a darling little thing?" they simpered, "and so well spoken." He patted my hair as if I were a well-trained lapdog. Sometimes I was so lonely I thought I might wither into ash and drift away on the next errant breeze. Sometimes I felt like an item in Mr. Locke's collection, labelled January Scholar, 57 inches, bronze, purpose unknown. So when he invited me to accompany him to London, on the condition that I was willing to listen to every word he said as if they were God's own commandments, I said yes so enthusiastically that even Mr. Sterling jumped. Half my stories and dime novels were set in London, so I was confident in my expectations. Dim, foggy streets populated by urchins and nefarious men in bowler hats, black-stained buildings that loomed in a satisfyingly gloomy way over one's head, silent rows of grey houses. Oliver Twist mixed with Jack the Ripper, with perhaps a dash of Sarah Crewe. Maybe parts of London are really like that, but the city I saw in 1903 was almost exactly the opposite, loud, bright and bustling. As soon as we stepped off the London and North Western Railway car at Euston Station, we were nearly stampeded by a group of school children in matching navy outfits. A man in an emerald turban bowed politely as he passed. A dark-skinned family was arguing in their own language. A red and gold poster on the station wall advertised Dr. Goodfellow's Genuine Human Zoo, featuring pygmies, Zulu warriors, Indian chiefs and slave girls of the East. "We're already in a damned human zoo," Locke grouched, and dispatched Mr. Sterling to find a cab to take us directly to the head offices of the Royal Rubber Company. The porters crammed Mr. Locke's luggage into the back of the cab, and Sterling and I dragged it up the white marble steps of the company offices. Mr. Locke and Mr. Sterling vanished into the dim hallways with a number of important-looking men in black suits, and I was instructed to sit on a narrow-backed chair in the lobby and not bother anyone or make a noise or touch anything. I contemplated the mural on the opposite wall, which showed a kneeling African handing Britannia a basket of rubber vines. The African wore a rather slavish, starry-eyed expression. I wondered if Africans counted as coloured in London, and then I wondered if I did, and felt a little shiver of longing. To be part of some larger flock, to not be stared at, to know my place precisely. Being a perfectly unique specimen is lonely, it turns out. One of the secretaries was watching me with narrow-eyed eagerness. You know the type. One of those squat white ladies with thin lips who apparently live their entire lives longing for the chance to rap someone's knuckles with a ruler. I declined to give her the opportunity. I jumped up, pretending to hear Mr. Locke calling for me, and skittered down the hall after him. The door was cracked. Oily lamplight oozed out, and men's voices made soft, hungry echoes against oak panelling. I inched close enough to see inside. There were 8 or 9 moustached men surrounding a long table piled high with all of Locke's luggage. The black cases were opened, and crumpled newspapers and straw were strewn everywhere. Locke himself stood at the head of the table, holding something I couldn't see. "A very valuable find indeed, gentlemen, all the way from Siam, containing what I'm told is powdered scale of some kind, quite potent." The men listened with unseemly eagerness in their faces, their spines curving toward Mr. Locke as if magnetically compelled. There was something odd about them, a kind of collective not quite rightness, as if they weren't men at all but other kinds of creatures stuffed into black-buttoned suits. I realised I recognised one of them. I'd seen him at the society party last July, slinking around the edges of the parlour with darting, yellowy eyes. He was a fidgety man, with a ferrety face and hair redder than even Miss Valentine's hair potion could manufacture. He was leaning toward Locke, just like everyone else. But then his nostrils flared, like a dog getting a scent it doesn't much like. I know people can't smell disobedient little girls spying on them. Really, I do. And how much trouble would I really have gotten in just for looking? But there was something secretive about the meeting, something illicit. And the man was tilting his head upward as if trying to catch a strange scent and track it. I flitted away from the door and crept back to my chair in the lobby. For the following hour, I kept my eyes on the tile floor, ankles neatly crossed, and ignored the sighing, huffing sounds from the secretary. 9-year-olds don't know much, but they aren't stupid. I'd guessed before now that all my father's artifacts and treasures didn't end up displayed in Lock House. Apparently, some of them were shipped across the Atlantic and auctioned off in stuffy boardrooms. I pictured some poor clay tablet or manuscript stolen from its rightful home and sent circling the globe, forlorn and alone, only to end up labelled and displayed for people who didn't even know what it said. Then I reminded myself that that was more or less what happened in Lock House itself anyway. And didn't Mr. Locke always say it was an act of criminal cowardice to leave opportunities unpursued? I decided another part of being a good girl was probably keeping your mouth shut about certain things. I didn't say anything at all to Mr. Locke or Mr. Sterling when they emerged, or during the cab ride to our hotel, or when Mr. Locke abruptly announced that he felt like a little shopping and directed the cab to Knightsbridge instead. We walked into a department store roughly the size of an independent nation, all marble and glass. White-toothed attendants were posted like smiling soldiers at every counter. One of them skittered towards us across the shining floor and trilled, "Welcome, sir. How may I help you? And what a darling little girl." Her smile was blinding, but her eyes interrogated my skin, my hair, my eyes. If I were a coach, she would have turned me inside out and checked my tag for my manufacturer. "Wherever did you find her?" Mr. Locke caught my hand and tucked it protectively under his arm. "This is my daughter. Adopted, of course. Between you and I, you're looking at the last surviving member of the Hawaiian royal family." And because of the confident boom of Mr. Locke's voice and the moneyed look of his suit coat, or maybe because she'd never met an actual Hawaiian, the woman believed him. I watched her suspicion vanish, replaced by fascinated admiration. "Oh, how exceptional! We have some lovely turbans from Lahore. Quite exotic. They would look so thrilling with that hair of hers. Or perhaps you'd like to look at our parasols to protect against the summer sun?" Mr. Locke looked down at me appraisingly. "A book, I think. Anyone she likes. She's proven herself a very good girl." Then he smiled at me, an expression detectable only by the slight bending of his moustache. I glowed. I had been weighed and found worthy. In the early summer of 1906, I was almost 12. The RMS Lusitania had just launched as the largest ship in the world. Mr. Locke promised we'd get tickets soon. The newspapers were still full of grainy pictures of the wreckage in San Francisco after that awful earthquake, and I'd used my allowance to buy a subscription to Outing magazine just so I could read Jack London's new novel every week. Mr. Locke was away on business without me, and my father was, for once, home. He was supposed to have left the day before to join Mr. Fawcett's expedition to Brazil, but there was some delay with documents getting stamped by the proper authorities and delicate instruments that required careful shipping. I didn't care. I only cared that he was home. We ate breakfast together in the kitchens, seated at a big scarred table marked with grease spots and burns. He'd brought one of his field notebooks to review and ate his eggs and toast with a tiny V creasing his eyebrows. I didn't mind. I had the latest instalment of White Fang. We disappeared into our separate worlds, together but apart, and it was so peaceful and right-feeling that I found myself pretending that it happened every morning, that we were a regular little family, that Lock House was our house, and this table was our kitchen table. Except, I guess, if we were a regular family, there would be a mother at the table with us. Maybe she'd be reading too. Maybe she'd look up at me over the spine of her book and her eyes would crinkle, just so, and she would brush the toast crumbs from my father's scrubby beard. It's stupid to think things like that. It just gives you this hollow, achy feeling between your ribs, like you're homesick even though you're already home, and you can't read your magazine anymore because the words are all warped and watery looking. My father gathered his plate and coffee cup and stood, notebook wedged beneath his arm. His eyes were distant behind the little gold-rimmed spectacles he wore for reading. He turned to leave. Wait! I gulped the word out and he blinked at me like a startled owl. I was wondering if... Could I help you? With your work? I watched him start to say no, saw his head begin a regretful shake, but then he looked at me. Whatever he saw in my face, the damp shine of almost tears in my eyes, the hollow aching, made him draw a sharp breath. Of course, January. His accent rolled over my name like a ship at sea. I revelled in the sound of it. We spent the day down in the endless cellars of Lock House, where all the uncategorised or unlabelled or broken items in Mr. Lock's collections were stored in straw-stuffed crates. My father sat with a stack of notebooks, muttering and scribbling and occasionally directing me to type out little labels on a shiny black typewriter. Hold on, I think possibly someone has unmuted themselves. There's only a couple of pages left. Where was I? I pretended I was Ali Baba in the Cave of Wonders, or a knight stalking through a dragon's hoard, or just a girl with a father. The lamp, yes. Put that over with the carpet and the necklace, please. Don't rub it, whatever you do. Although, what could it hurt? I wasn't sure he was speaking to me until he waved me closer. Bring it here. I handed him the bronze lamp I dug out of a crate labelled Turkestan. It didn't look much like a lamp. It looked more like a small, misshapen bird with a long spout for a beak and strange symbols carved along its wings. Father stroked one finger along those symbols, gently, and oily white steam began to spool from the spout. The steam rose, coiling and writhing like a pale snake, making shapes almost like words in the air. My father's hand swept the smoke away and I blinked. How? There must be some kind of wick in there and a spark. How does it work? He tucked the lamp back into its crate, a little half smile curling his mouth. He shrugged at me, and the half smile stretched wider, a glint of something like merriment behind his spectacles. And maybe because he smiled so very rarely, or because it had been such a perfect day, I said something stupid. Can I go with you? He tilted his head, smile retreating. When you go to Brazil, or the place after that, will you take me with you? It was one of those things you want so much it burns, so you keep it deep in the centre of yourself like a banked coal. But, to escape the hotel lobbies and department stores and neatly buttoned travelling coats, to dive like a fish into the thrumming stream of the world, swimming at my father's side. No. Cold, harsh, final. I'm a good traveller. Ask Mr. Locke. I don't interrupt or touch things I oughtn't, or speak to anyone or wander off. Father's brow crinkled into that puzzled V again. Then why should you want to travel in the first place? He shook his head. The answer is no, January. It is far too dangerous. Embarrassment and anger crept up my neck in hot prickles. I didn't say anything because then I would cry and everything would be even worse. Listen, I find valuable and unique things, yes, for Mr. Locke and his society friends. I didn't nod. Well, they are not the only interested parties, it seems. There are others, I don't know who. I heard him swallow. You are safer here. This is a proper place for a young girl to grow up. That last part came out with such a rehearsed, echoey sound that I knew it was a direct quote from Mr. Locke. I nodded, eyes on the straw-strewn floor. Yes, sir. But I will take you with me one day. I promise. I wanted to believe him, but I'd met enough empty promises in my life to know one when I heard it. I left without speaking again. Safely cocooned in my room, wrapped in the pink and gold bedspread that still smelled of nutmeg and sandalwood, I removed the coin from its tiny pocket in my skirt and studied the silver-eyed queen. She had a mischievous, run-away-with-me sort of smile, and for a moment I felt my heart swoop like something take flight, tasted cedar and salt in my mouth. I crossed to my dresser and tucked her into a hole in the lining of my jewellery box. I was too old to carry around such fanciful trinkets anyway. In March 1908, I was 13, which is such an intensely awkward and self-absorbed age that I remember almost nothing about that year, except that I grew 4 inches, and Wilder made me start wearing a terrible wire contraption over my breasts. My father was on a steamer heading to the South Pole, and all his letters smelled of ice and bird shit. Mr. Locke was hosting a greasy group of Texas oilmen in the east wing of Locke House and had ordered me to stay out of their way. I was just about as lonely and wretched as any 13-year-old has ever been, which is very lonely and wretched indeed. My only company was Wilder. She had grown infinitely more fond of me over the years, now that I was a proper young lady, but her fondness only meant that she smiled too often, a creaking, cobwebbed expression that looked as if it had been stored in a musty trunk for decades, and sometimes suggested we read aloud from Pilgrim's Progress as a treat. It was almost lonelier than having no company at all. But then something happened that meant I was never truly alone again.
I like it.
Yay! Hey!
A cliffhanger already.
I was wondering if you were just going to keep going until one showed up.
I am so angry at every single one of these adults. They're all shit.
Yeah.
Like, why don't we just put a child in solitary confinement? It's probably fine, right?
Throw them up down kids.
Yep.
Did that woman like drug her to sleep or something?
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck?
Which was really common in those days and only became illegal in the States in late 50s, early 60s, as everybody who's watched Queen's Gambit has probably learned.
Yay, opiates. Yay, opiates for children.
That's what we're all about.
It's all right, everybody. I think maybe some of these terrible grown-ups will get their comeuppance. Maybe.
You promise?
They fucking better, Frankie. They fucking better.
Yes, they will. That's absolutely fine. Yes, they definitely will. So what do we think so far?
It's really sad.
Yeah. Does it get happier?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, it is quite sad and lonely.
Yeah, like this is all stage setting. You know, this is all just building the picture for the adventures to start. There's a dog in the next bit. There's a dog in the next bit.
Yay!
I love the storytelling style of that, the opening few pages. It was quite whimsical.
Great prose.
Lovely.
I really loved the passage at the beginning about the idea that doors or portals are like the pivotal moment in a story. Like, that's so cool. And also, I don't know, I think probably everyone's perception of the start of this book is like colored by what other stories they've been reading recently. Like, for me, the first thing that occurred to me was like, oh, fuck, it's the Magnus Archives. Those doors that are a threat. They do not go anywhere good.
I watched Lock and Key recently, which also has a lock house with magical doors. That was my first thought too.
How exciting. How exciting. Woo! Oh, I really hope y'all like this. It's dramatic. Like,
good.
It's, you know, there's ups and downs, and there's some dramatic shit.
Emotional heft.
It will all be okay. I wouldn't feed you poison.
We trust you.
Oh, okay, wait, let's say goodbye to the catch-up crew. Let's say goodbye.
Hi, catch-up crew.
Catch-up crew. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye, we love you.